In this video, I'll be running through why your agency needs your gross margin numbers, ideally all the way down to a product level, if they are going to set return on ad spend targets for you. It is physically impossible to set a return on ad spend or an MER target that aligns with maximizing profit for the business unless you know gross margin numbers. And so if you're currently asking your agency to just come up with return on ad spend figures and they don't know your gross margins and you don't want to give it to them, or if you're currently working with an agency that isn't actively requesting your gross margin levels for you, you should leave that agency tomorrow because they cannot set meaningful KPIs unless they have access to that information. And I'll show you why in this video, because this is an unbelievably important concept for you to understand. So firstly, what actually is return on ad spend? Well, it's the revenue generated from an ad, or at least the attributed revenue from an ad, divided by the spend. Now, a better measure generally is looking at MER. MER is looking at total revenue within the business divided by total marketing spend. The reason why MER is a better metric, we have other videos on that. I would personally go and look at our video on why attribution is meaningless. And you will have a better idea as to why ROAS can really mislead you and end you up in a position where you're overspending or underspending, and MER ends up being a better KPI. Now, another way that sometimes you will look at things is at CPA, or the better version is CAC. Once again, CPA is based on attributed conversions. CAC is based on actual conversions within the store. And so let's add another line here for orders. And let's say that they have a $100 average order value. Therefore, they have 100 orders. And so in this particular scenario, with a business doing $10,000 a day, a month, a year, it doesn't matter for this example, $1,000 in spend, 100 orders, that's a ROAS or an MER of 10, and that's a CAC of $100. It's costing them it's costing them $10 to acquire each of these orders or each of these customers. Now, why is gross margin important, right? Because obviously the answer here would be, let's just try to get the lowest CAC possible and let's just try to get the highest MER possible. That should be the optimization function of the agency. And that's how I should be communicating to the agency. Hey, just go and get us the best ROAS or MER that you can. And if you can't get us a very good one, that's fine. We'll get rid of you. We'll find another one who can guarantee us a better MER or a ROAS. That kind of approach will allow you to never scale. And the reason why it will allow you to never scale is there is one fundamental truth that exists within advertising. And it's that CAC will go up. It's the only thing that exists. As you scale up advertising spend, you will lose efficiency. And there is no way around that. And the fundamental reason why that is the case is because you are going at colder and colder and colder audiences. And so yes, if you're a business doing $10,000 a month, you could go and operate at a 10 return on ad spend because you could target incredibly warm audiences. On Google, you're just placing on hyper-relevant, longer tail key terms. On Meta, you're just going at people that are super warm and Meta's choosing them as the highest priority. But if you actually want to do any kind of volume, if you actually want to scale the business, you are going to have to start taking losses in terms of this efficiency number. This efficiency number will have to come down. And this is where gross margin is absolutely critical. How far can we allow this to slip? If you're saying that you want to go and next month scale this up to $50,000, perfect. We know how to do that. We simply need to increase spend and then do more volume. But we know that ROAS and CAC will probably go up. Now, we'll do everything we absolutely can to prevent it from going up in terms of getting more expensive and getting less efficient, but it's probably going to get less efficient as we go out and prospect to all of these new audiences. And so because of that, if we're doing any kind of forecast here, if we're putting any kind of KPI in place, we need to understand, well, how low can this thing realistically go and you still make money? Now, if I don't know your gross margins and I don't know any of the unit economics of your business, I'm just going to go, well, to be honest, from my experience on scaling at this kind of rate, I would probably expect that we'd need to spend about this much. So ROAS is going to go down to 6.2 and CAC's going to go up to 16. And then you as the business owner is either going to go, that's not good enough, we need higher, without any actual reasoning as to why that's the case. Or alternatively, you're going to say, okay, perfect. I trust your ability to forecast based on your experience with working with hundreds of brands. We'll take this and we'll run with it. But you don't even know if this is making you money, right? And so we need to know gross margin. So let's layer in gross margin here. And this will be a percentage. And let's say you have 70% gross margin. Well, now what we can do is we can actually calculate what's called contribution profit. Okay, so there's net profit, and that's not what we're calculating here because we don't have your operating expenses, but we can calculate contribution profit. And this is one of the best metrics to hold an agency and KPI them towards. And so how contribution profit works is it's your revenue, and then you go down to the gross profit level. So if we do $10,000 in revenue, you're doing $7,000 in gross profit. And then we minus off the ad spend. And so minus off the ad spend over here, and you end up with $6,000 in contribution profit. Perfect. Now, if you go and then scale to these figures, we can then do the exact same math over here. And we now know that you're going to make $27,000 in contribution profit. And so this is a fantastic trade to make. You might be looking at efficiency here and going, wow, we've been so used to a 10 ROAS for the last 3 years, right? That's normally what we're used to. That's what we're acclimatized to. We don't want to go down to a 6. That seems too poor of a return. But the reality is that that kind of mindset and not being able to share the gross margin figure with your agency means that you're going to leave $21,000 in contribution profit per month on the table. And assuming that your operating expenses don't increase between these two scenarios, which realistically, if these are monthly figures, they kind of shouldn't, you're going to make an extra $21,000 a month in profit. Now, is that all going to be take-home dividends? Probably not, just due to the cash requirements that are going to be required in working capital to actually facilitate this kind of growth rate. But let's say you grow to this and then you just hold there for 4 months and you let the working capital accumulate and then you want to start pulling dividends. That does mean that you're going to be able to pull an extra $250,000 a year in dividends from making this decision, from going and increasing spend from 1K to 8K per month. Once again, this also translates per day as well. If you wanted to scale from 1K per day up to 8K per day, knowing how efficiency correlates into contribution profit is critical. And once again, if you don't provide gross margin to your agency, they have no idea what the contribution profit is. And so there's no way to actually know what's good or what's bad. And so let's change the scenario a little bit. And let's say that actually I'm looking at these numbers and maybe I've done some more fancy statistical analysis. Maybe I've done some logarithmic regressions based on your historical data. And I've actually assumed that, look, this is actually going to go way higher than 8,000. It's actually going to cost us about $14,000 to get to 50K revenue. You might look at that and go, wow, we have to 14x ad spend to only get a 5x in revenue. That sounds like a terrible deal. Why would we take that? But then you run the math and it's still a fantastic deal. You're still increasing your profit by 4x. Now, in fact, we could take this even further and let's just start pulling revenue down. And let's say revenue gets pulled down to 40K. So now you're only getting a 4x and you're 14xing ad spend and you are still in a better position. And so this is why, particularly with those brands that have these really high return on ad spend targets, hey, we want an 8, we want a 10 because they've worked with previous agencies or they've done their advertising in-house and they've acclimatized themselves to these really high return on ad spend numbers just due to over-attribution in the platforms. Like the reality is that if you're on a 10 ROAS on Google or Facebook, you're probably not. Like you probably aren't. Now you might be, by the way, like we do, out of the 100 brands that we currently work with, probably like 6 or 7 of them are actually rolling at about a 10 return on ad spend. But there's a few very specific reasons as to why that is the case. And it's not the norm. And so if you're watching this, you're probably not in the top 5% or that 5% audience in who is operating at a genuine real 10x ROI. And so if you see a 10 ROAS or 20 ROAS or 30 ROAS even in your platforms, you're not actually operating on that. You just have tons of over-attribution from brand search and from you retargeting existing customers or you retargeting warm audiences that found out about you elsewhere. And so the absolute reality is that when you go to scale, you need to be able to accept a much lower return to make much more profit. And this gets even more extreme when you factor in fixed costs or operating expenses. Now, this is something that we will always request from clients. Some clients don't want to give it to us, and I understand that because if you give us your operating expenses, we can calculate your net profit. Now, for us, it is incredibly helpful, and I'm about to show you why. But I also understand that some people don't want to just tell people what their net profit is of the business. I get it. But I'll tell you why it's important and why I would still recommend giving some kind of exposure as to what this number looks like to an agency, because this compounds 10x amount based on your operating expenses. And that was worded terribly. So let me actually show you what I mean. So once we have operating expenses, we can go and calculate net profit. So we can get all the way down to the bottom. We could call this EBITDA, even though they're kind of two different definitions, but let's just call it net profit for the sake of this. All we have to do to calc net profit is we take your contribution profit and we minus your operating expenses. What are your operating expenses? For this business, let's say they have a warehouse and they're doing their all their stuff themselves. Let's call this monthly figures just to keep stuff easy. And let's say they've got $5,000 in operating expenses. So what that means is they're currently doing $1,000 a month in net profit. We can even go in, if you want to figure out the percentage here, we can even quickly go and calculate the percentage, which is just net profit divided by revenue. And there you go. So they're currently operating at 10% revenue, $1,000 in net profit. Now over here, when they jump to $40,000 a month, the reality is their operating expenses should not increase much. As a lean direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand, the difference between $10,000 a month and $40,000 a month shouldn't be any staff. You shouldn't have any more staff doing $40,000 a month. Absolutely, you shouldn't. Maybe you have a VA offshore that's helping you with customer support. Your software cost might go up a tiny bit. There might be some other miscellaneous costs that increase a little bit, but it really shouldn't increase much. So let's say maybe you increase to $6,000 or $7,000, worst case scenario. And then we recalculate net profit and net profit percentage. You now go up to $7,000. So to clarify, the net profit of the business 7x's by your return on ad spend going from a 10 to a 2.8. I'll stress that again. The profitability of this business in nominal dollar figures 7x's when their return on ad spend goes down by over 70%. You lose 70% in efficiency. And that's the power of understanding the actual P&L items. Okay, if you provide gross margin, this can be understood by the agency, and therefore KPIs and decision-making within the ad account can be done to try to maximize this number to be as high as possible. And then if you also decide to, hey, actually, I'm convinced by what Nathan said, I'll actually give them operating expense as well, even more decision-making and more accurate forecasting can be put in place to be able to maximize this number too. Because there might actually be a case, there might be a revenue threshold, and this is the case with every e-commerce brand, where you need to make a hire. Okay, you might say that, hey, once we're doing $60,000 a month in revenue, we actually need to make another hire within our warehouse because there'll simply be too many orders to fulfill. And that's actually going to add an extra $4,000 onto our OpEx. And you can go, okay, well, if that's going to add an extra $4,000, we can forecast that in. And we can go, well, at this revenue level, you're going to do $11,000 in OpEx. And so actually, we can't allow your efficiency to drop to this level because of that additional expense that you're going to have to incur. And so now we know that we actually can't drop that low. We need to stay at a 4 or a 5 at that scale to be able to cover the increasing operating expenses to be able to actually operate at that revenue level. And you can see, obviously, in this case, that this business went from 10% net profit to 17.5% net profit from increasing their advertising spend 14x, but only seeing a 4x increase in revenue. And so I hope that this video did a good job at really pushing the point home that your agency needs to know at the absolute bare minimum the gross margin on your products, or else they cannot provide you with good KPIs on ROAS, MER, CPA, or CAC that's going to actually maximize your profit, because they have no idea how to even understand what your contribution profit is going to be. Because, for example, if you were actually at 40% and not 70%, look what happens to these numbers. This business actually lost money now. They went from a business that was doing $3,000 in contribution profit to $2,000. Profit goes down by 50%. Net profit, they're actually losing money. Now they're losing 2.5x the amount of money, right? So because of not knowing gross margin here, exact same, all these metrics, exact same, right? Revenue's the same, spend's the same, orders are the same, ROAS and MER are the same. But because gross margin was 40% instead of 70%, this decision drove the business probably into bankruptcy. But if your gross margin's 70%, this is driving your business into an incredible position to be in. You've just 7x the profitability of it. So please provide gross margin to your agency. If your agency is not asking for gross margin, They probably don't even understand this or know it, or else they would be really pushing hard for it, in which case, probably drop them and move to someone that's going to ask you about your gross margin, particularly within the initial discovery call and audit. If they are going to do an audit on your business and they do not ask you for gross margin, they will not provide you with a KPIs and a growth roadmap that actually aligns with the financial outcomes of the business.